Farid?
Waalaikumsalam. It's evening in Indonesia. I guess it's still in the morning.
It's morning. Yeah, it's morning, 9 o'clock in where I am, which is the U.S., Washington D.C. area. Good morning, Assalamu alaikum to everybody. To Dr. Ulil Abdalla, with whom I was looking forward to meet. Not in person yet still, but inshallah through the Zoom.
I'm so glad to see you in person finally, Mustafa.
Thanks so much. And we've been exchanging emails or Twitter messages and retweeting things. And
I hope that we can see in person in Washington or somewhere else in the US in the future.
Inshallah.
Are you based in Washington?
Yes.
I mean, how many more years are you going to be based in Washington?
Actually, just 3 years. I mean, my hometown is Istanbul, of course, Turkey. So
do you move to Washington for good or just temporarily?
For now, for good. I mean, if the world changes too much, I don't know what the future will hold. But I mean, I think I'll be here in the foreseeable future. Before this, I mean, we came here 3 years ago. Before that, I was in Turkey. I mean, I had a brief visiting fellowship to Wellesley College that was in Massachusetts, but I was, until 2017, basically, I was in Istanbul, and Istanbul is still my hometown, but this is the new home. So I got a position here. It was a better.
Are you still with Cato Institute?
Yes, that's correct. It's an institute devoted to the idea of human freedom, liberty, human rights.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
And they wanted to expand to the territory of the Muslim world and Islamic thought. So that's how I came to the picture. And,
at some point in the past, I collaborated with Cato Institute as well. I mean, like 10 years ago or 6 years ago.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
We received some grant from Cato for publishing some work, translation of certain book from English to Indonesia. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I didn't know that. Well, so you're familiar, and please come.
I'm familiar with the institution. Yeah, with the institute. Yeah.
Please come visit us. Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah.
And, sure, Farisha, please go ahead. So we took
yes, thank you. And Assalamualaikum, Gus Ulil, baru pertama kali ketemu.
Waalaikumsalam, Mbak.
Terima kasih sudah mau hadir. Ya.
Ya, terima kasih juga saya diundang di sini. Ini seri acara yang diadakan teman-teman ini bagus sekali ini. Ini di mana ini anunya, Pak ya? Base-nya di Jakarta ya?
Kami dari Jawa Timur. Ada yang di Surabaya, ada yang di Tulungagung.
Oh, tapi basisnya teman-teman di Surabaya?
Karena kondisi ini ya ada yang di Surabaya dan Tulungagung terpisah, belum ketemu selama pandemi ini.
Jadi ini lembaga yang dibikin online selama pandemi ini ya?
Iya, ya kelompok diskusi ini, Gus.
Keren sekali ini.
Iya, alhamdulillah. Ya saya lanjutkan untuk kita mulai diskusinya. Good evening from Indonesia, Mr. Akyol. Dan Assalamualaikum Gus Ulil juga, selamat malam. I will use bahasa in English interchangeably. I will read the speaker bio in bahasa so that more people will understand. But we will have the discussion in English. Hari ini teman-teman masih dalam bulan Islam dan Madani. Kita akan berdiskusi mengenai membela kebebasan beragama, defending religious freedom. Pembicara kita malam hari ini, Mustafa Akyol, adalah jurnalis dan penulis yang telah menulis 3 buku tentang Islam. Salah satunya, Islam Without Extremes, A Muslim Case for Liberty, telah diterjemahkan ke bahasa Indonesia dengan judul Islam Tanpa Ekstremisme oleh penerbit Kuanta. Dan juga ada buku The Islamic Chases, dan yang paling baru terbit di Juni 2021 adalah Reopening Muslim Minds, A Return to Reason, Freedom and Tolerance. Dan sejak 2013 ini, Pak Mustafa Akyol rutin menulis untuk The New York Times. Nah, bersama kita sebagai penanggap diskusi malam ini ada Gus Ulil Abshar Abdalla, seorang cendekiawan Muslim yang tentunya banyak teman-teman yang sudah tahu ya, AJIA Ulumuddin yang juga alumni Boston University. Dan terima kasih pada partisipan yang telah antusias hadir. Nama saya Farica, and I will be the moderator of tonight's discussion. Untuk teman-teman yang nanti ingin bertanya, bisa menggunakan fitur raise hand dan atau mengetikkan pertanyaan di kolom chat ya, dalam bahasa Indonesia maupun Inggris. Tonight, we will discuss about defending religious freedom. I will give a short, just a brief intermezzo. In today's secular world, or some would call it liberal world, the topic of religious freedom arose as strong as the problem of extremes and radical group within Islam itself. I say even within Muslim itself, we have problem of how to carry out our role as a Muslim within society while holding on to our faith. But we will listen more about it from the expert who has written a book about it. Now, Mr. Akyol, the time is yours. Yes, please, Mr. Akyol.
Oh, yes, sorry. I didn't hear that you gave it to me. Sorry. Thank you so much. Sorry, my Bahasa Indonesia is very poor, so I can just say salamat and salam alaikum to everybody. And thanks for having me in this event, and thanks for organizing it. It's also a pleasure to be with Dr. Ulil Abdalla, whose work I've been following and who's very popular Twitter account as well. And it's a pleasure to share the same platform with him. Now, I never had the chance to visit Indonesia, which I know is very beautiful, and inshallah someday I would love to. But your neighboring country and sister country, if you will, Malaysia, is a place that I visited, I think 6 times in 10 years or 12 years or something like that. Because I mean, my work has been published in Malaysia, and there has been a few institutions in Malaysia who were kind enough to invite me for events. 2 different institutions, but the most frequent one that published also my work was the Islamic Renaissance Front, which you may be familiar with. And in 2017, they invited me for a series of talks in Kuala Lumpur on my book on Jesus and my book on other Islam without extremes, is Islam tanpa keekstreman, if I'm not wrong, in the Bahasa Malaysia. So I went there. So it was like a long trip, and I went there again to Kuala Lumpur. It's a great place to visit. And there were 4 events. The second one was on a sensitive topic, which is very relevant to any discussion on religious freedom in the Muslim world. It was on the issue of ridda, as you know, it's called in Arabic, which is translated as often as apostasy, which is, you know, publicly renouncing your religion and changing your religion. So a Muslim who says I'm a Christian or an atheist or Buddhist, you know, will be doing apostasy. So is apostasy a crime? I mean, of course, no Muslim would want to see other Muslims leave the faith, right? No community wants to see that if you care for the soul of that person and his afterlife. But the question is this a crime, or is this still his freedom of religion? I mean, can he make that choice? This is a sensitive topic because about a dozen Muslim majority countries in the world today, apostasy is a crime punishable by death. So if you're an apostate, you can get that penalty, and there have been people killed for apostasy, or sometimes jailed for a long time because of international pressure. You know, they don't give the ultimate verdict, but a lot of people have been prosecuted for this. Now, in this speech in Kuala Lumpur, it was a 30-minute speech you can find online probably. I said, while we Muslims should stop seeing apostasy as a crime. Yes, we don't want to lose fellow Muslims, but if people don't believe in Islam anymore, genuinely and sincerely, what can you achieve by saying that, go back to Islam, otherwise I'll kill you in 3 days or execute you or will jail you? Of course, in Malaysia, they don't execute apostates, but they make it very difficult. They have rehabilitation centers to bring them back to the fold. And I said, we can advise people, but we should not send them to rehabilitation centers. And I said, imagine what Christians did the same thing. Imagine if Christians had the law of executing their own apostates. So a lot of the people who become Muslims, the muhtadis, as we call them, famous people, some of them from, former Cat Stevens to Yusuf Islam, and a lot of these people would be targeted by Christians for apostasy, right? And we would be probably very angry about that. We would be saying this is a gross human rights violation. Like, we shouldn't do the same thing. So if there's a world of religious freedom. And I said, well, if you read the Quran, actually, we can see that the idea that religion should not be coerced, it's right there in our scripture. So I reminded the very short passage in Baqarah 256, La ikraha fiddin, which means, let there be no compulsion in religion, or there is no compulsion in religion, or sometimes let there be no compulsion in religion. And I said at the end, well, if people don't believe in Islam, you really cannot police it. You cannot force them to believe it, because you can, at best, you can make them hypocrites. So a lot of people like to talk, and they were applauding, and but then 5 serious men walked into the room, and they said, "Are you Mustafa Akyol?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "You said religion cannot be policed. We are the religion police." So they are the Javi, actually their job. I mean, they showed me their cards. So their job is defined as religion enforcement officer. So, and they ask questions. They, took me to a room, asked some serious questions. Then they said, "Okay, we'll let you go, but we will watch your video and we'll make a decision." They said, "We heard complaints about your talk." So the next morning I woke up in Kuala Lumpur, and I heard that they summoned me to the Javi headquarters to get my testimony by a prosecutor. So it was a legal process. Then my hosts said, "Well, you have a flight tonight, so you should just go, and this can be dealt through lawyers and from afar. You don't need to do that." And I said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, that's the better idea." I said, "Okay." So I bought gifts, and I went to the Kuala Lumpur International Airport, and I got my boarding pass. When I gave my passport at the security, the female officer who got my passport saw my name, and she panicked, and she called people, and they called people, and ultimately I was arrested there. And I heard that Javi had issued a nationwide arrest order on my behalf, and I was detained. They were nice. I mean, they were not rude or harsh or violent or abusive, but it was a scary situation because I didn't know what the laws of the country are. And actually, they told me that I violated the law. When Javi came a few hours later, the religion police, and they said, "You violated the law which bans teaching religion without tevliya," which is permission from the authorities. And the punishment is 2 years in jail and this much ringgit, right? I mean, the money, I don't understand even the currency translations there. So I thought, I mean, will I go to jail for 2 years in this country that I came for just 5 days, for events? And luckily, yesterday, the next day, so I was locked that night at the Javi headquarters. The next day, I was taken to a Sharia court, and I was questioned there again. Luckily, they let me go, and I appreciate that part. They said, "Okay, we'll release you," and I was able to leave the country 24 hours, later. I mean, from the first arrest. But they said, "Don't come back again and teach Islam without permission." So I said, "Okay, I'll keep that in mind." So that's an important advice. And one thing that was really interesting is that they really asked me during that interrogation, "Did you quote La ikraha fiddin?" I said, "Yes." Like, what's the problem, right? It's an ayat, it's a verse from the Quran. So you quoted La ikraha fiddin? I said, "Yes." So probably they were trying to establish the fact that I did teach religion without tevliya. But once they let me go, I was curious about what was their problem about La ikraha fiddin, no compulsion in religion. And I said, "Oh, how do they translate it? Let me see." Because I know some translations published in Saudi Arabia that put a parentheses into that verse. And I said, "Are they doing the same thing?" And I checked, and I realized that, yes, they're doing the same thing. They insert the parentheses, which really changes the meaning of the verse or limits the meaning of the verse quite dramatically. Can I share a screen here? I want to show you, but host disabled participant screen sharing. That's what I'm saying. Can you allow me to screen share, Farisha? Okay, now yes. Okay. So are you seeing the screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So this is the beginning of the verse, the Quran, Surah, chapter 2, 256. There shall be no compulsion in religion. This is a very powerful statement against compulsion, which means freedom. But this is how Javi translates this. This is Jakim, actually. The Jakim is the official religious institution in Malaysia, and Jawi is the religious police of that. They say there shall be no compulsion in religion in becoming a Muslim. You know, they make a little addition here, in becoming a Muslim. So what is the difference between the two? I mean, and of course, this in becoming a Muslim, this is not in the verse. They are inserting this in, that's why it's in parentheses. So what's the difference? The difference is if you say there shall be no compulsion in religion, it's based on freedom. So you can be a Muslim, maybe you can leave the religion and you can practice it in the way that you really believe generally. But if you say there shall be no compulsion in religion only while becoming a Muslim, it means you can enter, but you cannot leave. So there's compulsion if you want to leave it, right? So there's no compulsion in religion is a very broad statement. They're saying there's no compulsion in religion only while entering it. Once you enter, you cannot leave. And also you are subject to the authority of the religion police, which can check if you're really fasting in Ramadan or you are, doing other religious obligations. Now, again, I said some translated, printed in Saudi Arabia do the same thing. This is Sahih International. This is a Quranic, translation, English translation of the word. There shall be no compulsion in religion. Again, they add this, in acceptance of the religion. So the idea is the same. There's no compulsion to some extent, because there's compulsion in other ways. Now, why they are doing this? So I will stop the screen share now. How do I stop this? Stop share, okay. Why both Jakim or Saudi translators, not all, but the Sahih International does that. Why are they doing this, inserting these parentheses into the verse? Because they don't actually want to accept the full meaning that there's no compulsion in religion, because they believe in other texts that they think should limit the meaning of this. What are those other texts? Well, we'll come to the issue of abrogation in the Quran, but mostly on the issue of apostasy. The issue is a few statements in the Hadith that are reports narrated from our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And there are two Hadiths on the issue of apostasy that is taken as the basis of the verdict of execution. One of them is in Sahih al-Bukhari, the most authoritative Hadith source, and it says, whoever changes his religion, then kill him. So this is the Hadith that is used to justify execution of apostasy. There's another one which says the blood of a Muslim is not lawful to shed unless he's one of the three: a married adulterer, someone killed in retaliation for killing another, or someone who abandons his religion and the Muslim community. Now, because Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, that is the interpretation of the Sharia, is not just about the Quran, but also about the Hadiths and their interpretation, our traditional jurisprudence thought that la ikraha fiddin and similar passages in the Quran give us an idea of freedom to some extent, but it's limited. It's limited because we have other verdicts. And I should say that the idea that people should not be forced to become Muslims is actually, that in itself, just in itself, is remarkable, because we know in Christian history, for example, a lot of Christians use the idea of forced coercion to make people Christians by force. I mean, Muslims and Jews were forced in Spain, for example, Catholic Spain in the 15th century. That's why they fled, and Jews fled Spain and to come to the Ottoman Empire to find religious freedom. So even the limited sense of the verse, la ikraha fiddin, has had in Islamic history great implications. Forced conversion was generally not the norm. That's why, for example, Armenians or Serbs or Arab Christians lived under Islamic rule for centuries and remained Christian, right? So it's important that, the verse gives that. But what about apostasy? What about also Muslims practicing religion in the way they deem fit rather than being checked by a religious police, which I'll come? The meaning of the verse is limited and based on hadiths generally, such as the one I just read. Now, when you say a hadith is from Sahih Bukhari, which is Sahih, by its name, a lot of Muslims will say, okay, we stop there, right? I mean, you don't question that. However, actually, in our Islamic tradition, especially in the early era, the issue of hadith, the authority of hadiths was disputed. And scholars, the scholars actually who built the hadith science made different categorizations. And the hadiths that were most trustable were mutawatir. Mutawatir meaning they had many people reporting the same thing. Oh, this Ahmed, somebody reporting from here, another Abdullah from here. So different parts of the Muslim world from different sources. So you have different chains of transmission. Although these were written several generations later, they said mutawatir is the most trustable one. These hadiths are not mutawatir. They are ahad, which means they have just one narrator. It's just one person says, I heard this from Prophet Muhammad. And the one in Sahih al-Bukhari, that whoever changes his religion and kill him, it's one man, Ikrima. And he says, I heard from Prophet Muhammad, he said this. And then, he says to other people, and it goes through the chains. And actually, our classical scholars realize that ahad hadiths are not certain. They are zanni. They are close, probably true, but not 100% undeniably true. So actually, and early Hanafis especially insisted that ahad hadiths cannot override general principles of the Quran. So, because ultimately they're not certain, but Quran is certain. The truth of the Quran is certain for Muslims. We don't doubt that. So actually, by even going from that direction, you can make an argument that the Quranic proclamations of freedom should not be overridden, should not be limited by ahad hadiths like the one I just. So that's an usuli argument. The other argument would be, by the way, there is nothing in the Quran about killing apostates. So most of these killing apostates, blasphemers, these come from hadiths or narrations, or even the life of Prophet Muhammad that were written 150 years later, 200 years later, but not the Quran itself, which is the earliest and undisputed, the only undisputed Quranic Islamic text. The other argument is that, well, changing a religion in the context of 7th century Arabia was a very different thing. Muslims were in a war of survival with first the polytheists of Mecca, because the Meccans tried to kill them, right? Then, and slaughtered the Muslims and persecuted them. And they had a war of survival for 10 years, ultimately. Then other Arab tribes. Then the Sassanid Empire. Then the Byzantine Empire. So it was a constant state of war, because it was a world of war. I mean, but Byzantine and Sassanids were fighting each other too. So it was not a world where you had United Nations and international borders and international treaties. And so peace was not the norm, but war was the norm. So in this environment, it is also normal that Muslims thought that whoever leaves us will join the enemy. So it has a strong connotation of rebellion and treason to the Muslim authority, the whole idea of apostasy. That's why one can doubt the authenticity of these sayings. Secondly, one can say, well, maybe these had a context that is not with us anymore. And you see that military sense among the Hanafis again. In Hanafi jurisprudence, apostates are executed if they are males. Females are not executed. And what's the difference? Well, in in warfare, women are not soldiers, but men are soldiers. So there's a strong idea that this person will become a threat, join the enemy and attack us. So we are punishing this treason, which in the modern world doesn't exist. When people change their religion today, they don't become enemy soldiers or terrorists or something like that. And I think that's why the whole idea that apostasy is a crime should be given in the Muslim world today. It doesn't make us anyone really believe in Islam. If it causes something, it causes more apostates, because a lot of people look at this and say, why does a religion believe this kind of coercion if it really trusts its truth? And I've seen actually losing faith in Islam and becoming apostates because they questioned the apostasy law and similar verdicts in our traditional jurisprudence. So this is one issue, which is religious freedom. This is one aspect of religious freedom. Another one is the issue of blasphemy. which is a burning issue in Pakistan especially, but I know there has been cases in Indonesia as well. And that is there in the issue of blasphemy. You don't have a Muslim renouncing his religion and giving up the faith. You just have someone, mostly non-Muslims, saying something disrespectful, to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or God, or the Quran, or Islam, or any value we have. Now, just like in the case, and Muslims, what do Muslims think about this? Well, this should be a crime, and there are laws against it. There are death penalty for it, in Pakistani laws, and certainly in Saudi Arabia or Iran, and in our traditional jurisprudence too. The crime for blasphemy, sab al-Rasul or sab Allah, that is the insulting of God or the Prophet, was seen as a capital crime, and there have been people executed for this in Islamic history. By the way, also I should say that blasphemy and apostasy verdicts were used to criminalize fellow Muslims too, just Muslims with different opinions. They're not apostates, but you call them an apostate and you go after them because they have an idea that comes to you as heretical. So again, in the Quran, there's no basis of punishing blasphemers actually. Again, this comes from certain reports about Prophet Muhammad, and it's not even a hadith there, but it's the seerah, it's the biography of Prophet Muhammad. So we hear about certain people executed in Medina because they said ugly things to Prophet Muhammad. But when you look carefully into those stories, which I did in my book, you see that those people were actually not executed for insulting Prophet Muhammad. They insulted him, but at the same time, they physically attacked Muslims. Or they went to Mecca and incited war against Medina. So Ka'b ibn Ashraf, the famous figure there. He was not, people call him a poet who ridiculed Prophet Muhammad. Yes, he was a poet who ridiculed Prophet Muhammad, but he also went there he caused the Battle of Uhud by inciting war against Medinan Muslims for a second time. So, and there are cases of Prophet Muhammad being insulted, just as insults, and he forgives. Actually, he stops the Sahaba, his companions, from going and attacking or punishing those people. He shows mercy, So the idea that blasphemers should be punished, I think, is not there. This doesn't mean that we Muslims will be happy to hear blasphemous words. We will not. We want respect in the world. That's the culture we want to promote. But if people are not respectful, what are we going to do? A verse in the Quran in Surah Nisa, the 4th chapter. I forgot the name and the number, but I can share later. It's the most relevant verse about mockery of Islam, ugly words about Islam. It says, if you hear God's verses being mocked by a group of people, then do not sit with them unless they engage in a different discourse. So if you hear people making fun of God, it doesn't say go and execute those people. It doesn't say go and jail those people. It doesn't say beat and silence them. It says do not engage with them. Do not sit with them. Because if they are disrespectful, you refuse people. You disrespect. And I think that's a more mature response in the world today when we hear cartoons that we don't condone and we're against, morally. Again, like cartoons, ridiculing cartoons about Prophet Muhammad or ugly words and ugly sayings about him. What we should do is to disengage from those people. And I think that will bring less blasphemy to Islam, because the more we insist on being able to silence certain words, the more people, certain people insist saying those things because they see this as an attack on their freedom of expression. Another issue which is very pertinent to religious freedom, is religious policing. There's a name for it in our tradition, Hisba. And it's very much on the news these days in in Afghanistan with the second arrival of the rule of the Taliban. Now, Taliban said recently, you might have heard that. I mean, when Taliban came to power, everybody was like wondering, what will they do to women, right? They said, we will not be as bad as the 90s. Okay, let's see what's going to happen. So they said, we will not stop them from going to school, which is fine. They said, we will not even force the burqa, which is fine. They said, but at least they have to wear a hijab. Actually, they forced the niqab, the face veil, in universities. So in Afghanistan today, if you're a Muslim woman, they will probably impose it on everybody, but You cannot say, this is how I understand the Quran, and I wear a hijab, or maybe I don't, it's my religious piety, it's between me and God. No, the Taliban will come and say, you have to wear it. And if you don't, they will flog you, right? This idea that you are forced to practice the religion in the way that the enforcers define it. It is also a major issue, I think, in our jurisprudence and in parts of the Muslim world today. For example, there are laws in Saudi Arabia. I mean, or UAE, or even in Pakistan, if you're in Ramadan and have a glass of water in the middle of the day, that is disrespect to the Ramadan, and you will be prosecuted for that. Whereas, I mean, a Muslim cannot fast for many reasons. He can be sick, he might be on travel, he might be too old. It is worship between the Muslim and God, but somebody else controls it. And this idea of religious policing. Now, this is called hisba, and the people who do are called muhtasib. And again, this goes back to Prophet Muhammad. We know that the Prophet Muhammad established a muhtasib in Medina. But when you look into what the Prophet actually did there, you see something very interesting. The muhtasib that the Prophet Muhammad established in Medina was about checking the market and preventing fraud in the Medina market. Make sure that everybody is selling, without any fraud, because there was one man who was putting water in his grains, and the grains were lifting heavier. And actually, there's a Quranic verse condemning those people who make fraud while buying and selling. So the muhtasib was actually about the marketplace. It's just like policing you would find in any society. I mean, if you're cheating, frauding, if you're selling, defective products intentionally, that's a crime everywhere in the world, and it should be, because of the fairness of trade. So, but this idea of the muhtasib gradually became religious policing, and in my book I show that this happened gradually. It wasn't actually the intention, the original definition of the Prophet. Another concept from the Quran is used for religious policing, that is Emre bil Maruf and Nahi anil Munkar, which means commending the right and forbidding the wrong. It is there, it's in the Quran, but what does it mean? And when we look into the earliest Quranic tafsirs, like the tafsir of Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, you see that it was defined as proclaiming the truth of Islam and banning polytheism. But this gradually turned into checking everything, whether you are fasting, whether if somebody's drinking wine, who should be flogged and punished. So, and this happened historically. And my understanding is that we have an Islamic tradition which is full of wisdom, but we have an Islamic tradition which is full of cultures and norms of societies that lived 10 centuries ago. We have a lot of patriarchy. There are sayings in our scholars' writing saying that a woman should always obey the husband, and after God, a woman is supposed to obey the husband, and that sort of thing. And I see these things as really not coming from the Quran, not from revelation, but from the culture of the societies in which Islam was born. And can we change these things? Yes, because I think we can make reforms on these issues by first going back to the Quran, and also getting rid of the idea that certain verses of the Quran are abrogated by other verses. This has been a major part of the issue, because there are verses in the Quran, not just la ikraha fiddin, but for example, another verse says, the truth is from your Lord, let anyone who want to believe it, let anyone who want to believe it, let anyone who want to disbelieve it, disbelieve it. Or a verse says to Prophet Muhammad, you are not a compeller over people, you're just a warner. But these verses were considered abrogated by the later verses in Medina, which were about war between the polytheists. And those wars were contextual. Those wars came because Muslims were persecuted in the first place. But medieval jurisprudence, Sunni jurisprudence, took the war verses about the verses of toleration and non-coercion, which is freedom. And I think, first of all, the idea of abrogation, which has been questioned by scholars in the modern era, should be questioned, and I think it should be put aside. And I think we should understand that war is an abnormal state in human affairs. It has its own rules, but peace is the primary mode right now, and the Quranic verses that relate to a peaceful society are the ones that should be taken as definitive. Whereas it was turned upside down. The war verses were defined were used to define the whole Islamic outlook. Another issue is equality before law. Like, do Muslims and non-Muslims have the same rights? Should they have the same rights under the law? And again, this was not the case in our traditional jurisprudence. In our traditional jurisprudence, both in Sunni and Shia, but the Sunni one counted, but basically Sunnis ruled, Muslims had more rights than Christians and Jews. And the Christians and Jews were tolerated, but they were not given the equal rights. People don't know that most of the time, that this was already abandoned in favor of equal citizenship by the caliphate of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, the last legitimate caliphate on earth, depending on who you ask, I think was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire in the 19th century initiated a period of reform called Tanzimat, and in 1876, the Ottoman Empire declared a constitution which said all Ottoman citizens, regardless of their faith, of religion and race, are equal in their rights. So the whole idea that Muslims are supreme and they tolerate non-Muslims as people with lesser rights, which was great 1,000 years ago when everybody was totally being slaughtered for being a different religion. But this was actually abolished by the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman ulama discussed this, and they gave the green light for doing this. That's how the Ottoman constitution came. Because some of the things in our jurisprudence are historical. They're there because that's how things were done 10 centuries ago. It was not an unchangeable verdict of Islam. And a very clear example of this, I'll give you one example, which shows that there were things in our Sharia, in our jurisprudence, but which is not here with us today, and it's good that it's not with us today, and that is slavery. If you read our jurisprudence, you will see, slavery was taken as a normal state of affairs of human beings until the modern era, because everybody had slavery. When Islam came to the world, there was slavery, and actually Quran encouraged freeing the slaves as a pious act. But Muslims didn't think that this is a full abolition of the institution. In the old world, it was the norm that if you fight somebody, if you win over them, you take them as slaves. So this is what pre-Islamic empires did. This is what Muslim empires did. But in the 19th century, there emerged an idea in the world, the West, we should be fair about that, in Britain, the idea that slavery should be abolished and everybody should be free people. And when some Muslims saw this idea, some of them said, this is great. This is actually what the Quran is calling us for, freeing a neck. Freeing the slaves is a pious act. So they were the Islamic reformists. But there were others who said, this is in the Sharia. It can never change. And that is why when the Ottoman Empire banned slave trade in 1856, there was a revolt in Mecca against the Ottoman Empire. Sharif Grand Abdul Muttalib said, the Turks have become infidels because they're changing the Sharia, because they are banning slave trade. So that was the ultra conservative, the fundamentalist reaction, if you will. Today, slavery is gone. It's not there. But we should not forget, it was not gone easily. It was abolished in Saudi Arabia in 1961. It was abolished in Mauritania in 1982. The last country on earth to abolish slavery was Mauritania. And as a Muslim, when I look at this, I feel a bit sad, because we could have been the first civilization to abolish slavery. But we resisted, because we didn't make a distinction between what is religious and what is historical. Whatever is written in a fatwa 10 centuries ago isn't necessarily religion. It is how religion was understood in a certain time. Similarly, our scholars until the modern era didn't think that the people who rule us, the sultans, should be elected in every 5 years and lose their government if they're not successful, right? If we vote them out. No, they thought that a sultan comes and he rules until he dies, basically. because the idea of democracy wasn't there yet. But is democracy a bad thing? Was the Sultan regime a good thing? Was it a good thing that a man captures power and stays there until he dies? I think democracy is a better way of governing, and that's an achievement of humanity that we mostly learn from. I mean, Indonesia is a democracy. So I think one underlying problem in most of these issues in the Muslim world is that there is a rigid conservatism that doesn't, I'm not saying all conservatism, but rigid conservatism, that doesn't try to understand that when we call the Islamic tradition, there is a divine core to it, that is the Quran, but then there is a whole human tradition built around it. And we have to respect the tradition, but we cannot worship the tradition. Right? We should be also open to the achievements of humanity, as our great scholars were. I mean, the reason why they studied Aristotle or Plato 12 centuries ago shows that they believe that Muslims can learn from other civilizations and contribute to other civilizations. So I believe, at the end of the day, I believe religious freedom is a value that is deeply established in the Quran, from la ikraha fiddin to other verses, but we have not been successful enough in cultivating that value. And some of the religious freedom crises we're seeing in the Muslim world today are examples of that. One more thing, we are in a difficult situation, I believe, in the world of Islam in the 21st century. Christianity was way worse. Christianity, when you look at 17th century, look at how the Catholics and Protestants killed each other for sectarian hatred for a century. Half of Europe was soaked in blood. I mean, Catholics slaughtered Protestants on the streets of Paris, and then you had the 30 Years' War. And heretics, we have apostasy laws. Actually, at least we're not burning people alive. Christians were burning heretics alive, putting them on stakes and putting them under fire. At some point, and there was the Inquisition torturing people supposedly for their own good. So Christian history is pretty brutal. But Christianity, beginning with ideas of freedom, toleration, and ultimately human rights, outgrew that phase. And that's why you don't see, Christian apostates being threatened in the world right now. And I think, although we have better roots when you look into religious pluralism, we lagged behind regarding religious freedom. So I'll say what I said in Malaysia, and it's good that no religious police will come and get us after this event. That doesn't happen in Indonesia, right? So we should embrace religious freedom. We don't need any coercion. If we Muslims are really believing in our faith, we should be confident about that. There will be people who will not believe. There will be people who will be critical. There will be people who are Muslims in the way they understand. So we cannot enforce our own understanding of Islam to them, because ultimately Islam is a sincere faith between man and God, between woman and God, and the servants of God, human beings, are not supposed to be ruling over each other by saying, I'm the guardian of it. Thank you, and I'll be happy to hear your comments, questions, and objections too. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Mr. Akyol. I will explain the point in bahasa. Jadi ada beberapa poin yang disampaikan oleh Pak Mustafa Akyol. Pertama, mengenai kemurtadan, dalam bagaimana kita Muslim memperlakukan mereka yang murtad dari agama, dari semua agama sekalipun. Yang kedua adalah isu tentang penistaan agama. Itu juga isu yang kita sebagai bangsa Indonesia beberapa tahun belakangan banyak mendengar isu-isu persoalan mengenai itu. Yang ketiga adalah polisi agama, atau mungkin kita biasa mengenal dengan istilah polisi syariah. Dan keempat adalah isu mengenai keadilan di muka hukum, bagaimana hak dan kewajiban mereka yang berbeda agama dalam suatu negara. Tapi sebelum kita beralih ke pertanyaan para partisipan, kita akan mendengarkan tanggapan dari Gus Ulil. Silahkan, Gus Ulil.
Terima kasih Mbak Fariha. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good night and good morning to Dr. Akyol from Washington. First of all, I'm so happy and so glad and so honored to be speaking to you in the same platform with Dr. Mustafa Akyol, whose work had been read and studied, read thoroughly by many friends from Indonesia. I'm so happy to be in the same platform with Dr. Akyol. Before I go into my comment, I would tell a story about, and this is my personal story, about me dealing with the work of Dr. Akyol. So I think around 6 years ago, I founded a reading group there, and this is a group that was it consisted of 6, 7, 10 people, young students. They were very interested in studying argument and defense of liberty and freedom from Islamic point of view, and we ended up reading your works, your first work entitled Islam Without Extreme. So we read the books from cover to cover, from the beginning to finish with my friend. I was functioning as, let's say, as a tutor, as a lecturer, but I lectured from your book, from Islam Without Extreme. And I guess this book has been translated into Bahasa Indonesia, I guess, yeah.
Yes.
And it's a very wonderful work, I guess. I think one of the best book written from the for larger audience, defending freedom from Islamic point of view. I know that there are many work done by many Muslim scholars, either in the West or in the East, from the Arab world, from America and other countries. There are many scholars working on the similar topic on defending freedom from Islamic point of view. But most of the work are too scholarly and very difficult to handle for the layman, for the lay people, for the lay person. And Dr. Akyol has a gift and a talent at handling any topic with a very lucid language, easy, language, and very very accessible for the layperson. And I compliment Dr. Akyol for this talent of making scholarly argument for freedom from Islamic point of view, from a layperson point of view, using an easy language, a lucid essay, and so forth. And this is very important because, and this is the problem of Muslim world today. We are not lacking in scholars and ulama and cleric and asatidha. We are rich of them. But the problem is that the ulama, the scholars, and also the people in academia, they are speaking to each other with a very obscurantist language. It's not easy for the layperson to read their work. Just pick, for example, one of the finest minds that we have today in the U.S. state, in the U.S. Yeah, Professor Khalid Abdul Fadl, for example. He's a bright and a smart ulama, scholar and an ulama. He founded an Usuli Institute based in, I guess, in California, I guess. Yeah. He's a smart. Yes, in California. No, in LA, in Los Angeles, in LA, in Los Angeles. And he's very bright. He's very, very, very smart and well-versed and very well knowledgeable in Islamic sciences. And other name is Dr. Abdullahi An-Naim, who is teaching now in Emory University. He is also very smart. But the problem with those scholars and with other ulama in Middle East and other Muslim countries, they wrote a very heavy work. They speak to each other in a scholarly language without the layperson being able to access their work. And this is the problem, because what we need is a reform project or a reform movement that can address people in the street, not people in the academia, because people in the academia, they are already smart. What we need is a movement, an intellectual movement, a reform movement that can address people in the street and also can speak to the youth. I'm so happy tonight that we have a young student joining us for this conversation, and that's very, very important. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Akyol, for writing such a good work in a very easy language, and I enjoy your book. I read it, all of it. I read all of it. You know.
I'm humbled to hear that.
I enjoy your essay. And also the way you frame your argument is so compelling. It's so clear and compelling. And this is another thing that is important as well. So can I share just to a screen? Yeah, just can I share a screen?
Sure.
Please, yeah. Just to illustrate what I'm speaking now, to make it clear. Yes. So this is my screen, very simple, and I guess I need it, yeah. Yes. So there are two types of defense of freedom or liberty, yeah? And this is very important. So there are two types of defense of, because the main topic, the main theme that was dealt with by Dr. Akyol is about freedom and liberty, and this is his concern, his intellectual and I guess also spiritual preoccupation since his first work, Islam Without Extreme. So freedom and liberty. So there are two types of the defense of liberty: secular defense and religious defense. Secular defense, you know, we have many scholars, many activists, intellectual defending freedom and liberty from secular point of view. There are many, you know, thousands of work written from this point of view. So we don't need to talk about this. But what we are lacking in is religious defense of freedom and liberty. This is very important, because the problem with the secular idea of liberty and freedom, for example, if the idea of the discourse of human rights is discussed from secular point of view, for example, it's good, of course, but the problem is that whether this secular discourse can be accepted by Muslim, for example. Do Muslims accept the secular argument of, you know, human right, the right to apostasy, for example? I don't think so, because you need a particular language to speak to the Muslim, to the Christian, to the Hindus. Tonight we are talking about Muslim, so we need an Islamic language to defend freedom and liberty. And this is very important because in Indonesian case, for example, we have a lot of human rights activists. A lot. I mean, we have a human rights advocacy group, for example, a lot. But the problem is that the argument for liberty and freedom and human rights is lacking in persuasion. It doesn't persuade the Muslim because it doesn't use, you know, an Islamic point of view. Sometimes the secular activists look down to the religious argument for human rights because they see that we don't need Islamic argument for human rights. I mean, because human right in itself is enough, it's sufficient. We don't need a Christian argument, you know, Islamic argument, Hindus argument for defending human rights because this is a distraction. What we need is to stuck with human right as an idea and forget religious discourse or religious argument. And I think it's a mistake. It is a mistake, yeah. We need an Islamic argument for freedom and liberty. You know, if you read a John Locke treatise on toleration, a treatise concerning toleration by John Locke, it's a very wonderful treatise. Yeah. It's not complicated. It's very clear as an essay. Yeah. If you read the letter concerning toleration by John Locke, it is. I mean, in a way, John Locke framed his argument by making a lot of reference to the Bible. So I consider a letter on toleration by John Locke as a Christian, even though it's not entirely Christian, but it is in a way a Christian defense of toleration. And we need some kind of that defense from Islamic point of view. And this is what has been done by Dr. Akyol in this book and in his previous book. Yeah. So defending freedom and liberty from Islamic point of view. And I think the battle to win the mind of Muslim lies exactly in this particular point. Yeah. You know, defending freedom and liberty from Quranic point of view, from prophetic traditions, and also from our rich intellectual tradition. And we need that. We need that. And I'm happy that Dr. Akyol did that in this book. Yeah. This is first. Second, this is my critical remark on what Dr. Akyol has said in his presentation. I mean, he said many times in his presentation tonight and also in his book, I mean, he always make a case for returning to the Quran. And this is a common, refrain, a common theme, a common trope that I found in many Muslim scholars today, return to the Quran. I mean, the assumption behind this call for return to the Quran is that the Quran is the original message, is a text within which the original message of the Prophet of the Islam of God has been forged or put into. But I think I have some objection to this, yeah. Because okay, I agree that we should go to the Quran because Quran represent the original message of God and of the Prophet, yeah. But we cannot leave Hadith. Why? And this is my point. If we ignore Hadith, I know that Dr. Akyol doesn't call for ignoring Hadith entirely. I know that. But the idea that we should return to the Quran solely without giving sufficient attention to the prophetic tradition is problematic. Because why? Because if we do not deal with the hadith, we leave this tradition to the Salafis. That's the problem, because the Salafis and Wahhabi are taking pride in hadith studies, and they want to give an impression to the Muslim that they are more Muslim, more Islamic, more authentic in their adherence to Islam, because they use hadith. So hadith is a religious capital used by the Salafi to show their credential, their strong credential in the eyes of the Muslim. And I don't like this. We should challenge the Salafis, because hadith is very important. We cannot leave hadith to the Salafis. We should also deal with the hadith. We should study the hadith, but we should study the hadith from reform point of view, from progressive point of view. And this is what is done by my friend. This is his picture, Dr. Fakihuddin Abdul Qadir. So he did a lot of hadith studies. He produced a wonderful work entitled Qira'ah Mubadala. This is, I think, an original work dealing with hadith, to interpret hadith from the gender justice point of view. And I think this is very important. So my point is that we cannot leave hadith to the Salafis, to the Wahhabis, to the conservative, because it's too risky. We have a high stake in hadith. So reformers, Muslim intellectuals have, an important responsibility to study hadith seriously and recontextualize hadith within our challenge today. And I believe that if we studied hadith seriously, I think we can extricate hadith from the monopoly of the Salafis. And this is our challenge for the future. So hadith is very important. Quran, of course, Quran is very important, but Quran is limited in its scope. Hadith, I mean, you like it or not, hadith is so important for the Muslim people. I mean, Muslims see hadith as their spiritual and intellectual guidance. I mean, I know that there are some people who do not like hadith. I mean, they want to leave hadith completely, relying solely on the Quran, but this is not a good solution in my mind. So we should study hadith, but we study hadith using a modern approach, using a modern paradigm, and using our experience as a Muslim living in a modern time as a lens, as an approach through which we study the hadith. Yeah. This is my comment on Dr. Akyol's presentation. Just a minor comment, but in general, I compliment him for producing this work, and I enjoy this work because it's covered various topics from Ibn Rushd, reason, rationality, science. I like it. I like all of it, especially Dr. Akyol's discussion of the problem of apostasy and hisbah. This is very important, yeah. So thank you very much, and I return the platform to the moderator.
Terima kasih Gus Ulil, thank you. Menarik komentarnya. It's interesting that Gus Ulil highlights the importance. It seems that it is important for us Muslim or everyone who wishes to study about Islam to look not solely to the Quran, but also to look into Hadith. And when we dive into the interpretation of the Quran and Hadith, it's also important, as stated by Mr. Mustafa Akyol, to investigate or to look into the context or the historical background of it. And untuk teman-teman, untuk rekan-rekan yang ingin bertanya, bisa menggunakan fitur raise hand atau mengetikkan pertanyaan di kolom chat. But first, we have a question already from Sultan Zuhdi. He asked, Mr. Akyol, what are the indicators that can bring Islam back to be more cosmopolitan, like in the early centuries of its emergence, where Islam is able to communicate equally with Western or Eastern philosophy, science, and existing cultures, and not fall for atheistic secularism or conservatism? That's his question.
Thank you so much. Faricha, am I saying it right?
Yes, Faricha.
Okay. Thank you so much, Faricha, and thanks to Dr. Abdalla very much. Very good points. Well, one thing, I'm not a doctor actually, so we should even. I mean, I'm thankful to the compliment, but I didn't do a PhD. I did masters, and I think the reason that you mentioned is I've been a newspaper columnist for 15 years in Turkey, so I have written for the public audience, but I've deeply studied the Quran and the Turkish Islamic tradition. And you mentioned some names like Khalid Abu Fadl, Abdullah Naim. I learned a lot from those scholars who write in English, obviously. Turkey has its own scholarly tradition, ilahiyat, as we would call it. And actually, in some of my writings, what I do is to actually bring the Turkish approach, again, a certain segment in the Turkish Islamic approach, we call the modernists or historicists, into the global sphere. I mean, Fazlur Rahman had a great impact on some of the Turkish scholars, for example. Plus, there is the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman history. My master thesis was on late Ottoman history. So the Ottoman reforms in the 19th century are, I think, still important because parts of the Muslim world are still not there. I mean, compared to the Ottoman reforms back there. Just, I'm saying this as I appreciate the fact that you called me doctor, but just wanted to clarify that. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. And the other thing, so I'll come to the question, but before that, of course, and I'm not a Quranist. I mean, there are people who are Quran only, right? I have my friends in Turkey, some of them are Quranists. And first of all, you cannot understand the Quran without knowing Hadith and Sirah. Like you read the Quran, there is some battle is speaking about what was it? I mean, first the Sirah, the biography of the Prophet is important because the Muslims who received the Quran, the Sahaba, they know what the verse was about. It came to their lived experience. We don't know what is a particular verse is speaking about in a given situation. So you need Asbab al-Nuzul, you need Sirah, and you need Hadith. However, I also believe that the Ahl Hadith movement in early Islam, whose modern day extension, most strict extension is the Salafis, they built the Hadith collections, the two Sahihain, the Sahih Bukhari, Muslim, plus the other 4 books, the 6 books, to such a level, such an unquestionable level that really overshadowed some of the Quranic teachings and introduced new teachings into Islam. And I believe we should always be open to the possibility that any ahad hadith could be a manipulative intervention, because we know there were so many fake hadiths already. I mean, in the first centuries of Islam, people made up hadiths for everything. Arab nationalists made hadiths praising Arabs. Turkish nationalists responded by other hadiths. And there are hadiths that were made to demonize the sect that you don't like. Like, these are the worst people of our ummah. These people will come and they are the heretics and so on and so forth. So these things, I believe, were created later to put in the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad. Why? Because I personally don't think that Prophet Muhammad would look into the future and make a choice between these different Islamic groups and And because always those hadiths prefer the one who circulated those hadiths, which is very suspicious. And I think some of the hadiths about obeying the ruler no matter what he does, that kind of stuff is very suspicious. It's just I'm saying we should bring a certain question mark when we're looking into the hadith collection, because hadiths were canonized 2 centuries after the Prophet Muhammad. There were written documents here and there, but mostly oral traditions. And Sahih Bukhari 2 centuries later. So it is inevitable that there could be mistranslations. I mean, you have 6 people saying to each other in their memory. Are they really that trustable? Second, they might be most trustable and pious people. Do they really remember? I mean, human memory is, people imagine things because they believe in it. They project it back. So human psychology wasn't very much considered at the time. If this is a good person, he's honest, so it's done deal. Well, maybe he was a good person, but his memory wasn't accurate. So how can we trust that? So I'm just believing in bringing a certain questioning attitude to the hadith collections, but we cannot do without those collections, because that's the history of Islam. That gives a lot of information, but we should be always open to the risk that we might, when we're looking into a hadith, we might be looking into a hearsay, sometimes a fake, fabricated sayings, because people put those things in the hands of Prophet Muhammad. One thing, what is the most circulated, the most transmitted hadith saying of Prophet Muhammad? Like, what is his words that everybody heard it and gave it to us? It's the last khutbah, right? I mean, the farewell sermon. So thousands of people heard that, the farewell sermon. But when you read the farewell sermon, at the end, you will see that there are 3 versions. In one version, Prophet Muhammad says, I leave to you the Quran and my Sunnah. And that's popular among Sunnis. In another version, he says, I leave to you the Quran and my Ahl Bayt. Guess who's very, into the Shiites, that's popular among the Shiites. Another version, he says, I'm leaving you the Quran, period. So that was more of an Ahl Ray approach, probably it became more. So even the farewell sermon, which was seen by incredibly big number of people, at the very end has these 3 different versions. So which shows that nothing is like as authentic as the Quran. Because and it's interesting that the Orientalists who wanted to disprove that the Quran is authentic, that it came a century later, and all those kind of studies collapsed. And now there are even people who are negatively Orientalist, except that the Quran is a very early document in the history of Islam. Nothing compares to that. So I think we have to bring this recognition so that when there is a hadith that seems clearly violating a Quranic principle, we can introduce some doubt about it. Which is a way of engaging it, of course. So we should not, and I don't believe that you can just read the Quran and nothing else and get a good sense of Islam. So I'm not a Quranist in that sense. Come back to the question, how Islam can be more cosmopolitan. Now, this is actually a separate discussion, but actually much of my new book, Reopening Muslim Minds, partly is about that. Here's something interesting. We know great scholars, great minds from our Islamic history, like who is one of them? Ibn Sina. There are hospitals in Turkey given Ibn Sina, and we say, oh, Ibn Sina was the pioneer of medicine, and Europeans learned from him for centuries. And what was the secret of Ibn Sina? Before him, Farabi, before Al-Kindi, and ultimately Ibn Rushd, these great minds of Islam that influenced Europe. That's why all they had Latin names. Ibn Sina is called Avicenna. Al-Farabi is called Al-Faribus, and Ibn Rushd is known as Averroes, right? Because Latin, they translated Latin, and it blew the minds in Europe. Oh my God, these Muslims are so smart, right? I mean, there are towering minds. What was their secret? Well, they were Muslims. They were all pious. They were all believing Muslims. But they also studied Aristotle. They also studied Plato. They also studied Euclid or other Greek thinkers and Christian theologians and Jewish sources. So, in other words, they didn't say all the wisdom we need is in the Quran and Hadith. Like what's the justification of studying an infidel named Plato, right? Aristotle. Why Muslims studied those? Because they had the idea that God gave human beings revelations, like the Quran, like the Bible before that. I mean, the Torah and the Gospel and other revelations. God sent prophets, but God also gave reason, aql, to human beings. And even human beings without revelation can be wise and virtuous and can develop good ideas. So there's no harm in learning from Aristotle, who was obviously not a Muslim, right? So they didn't say, this is kuffar, and we don't hear from the kuffar. No, they studied those traditions. When they studied, they came into places which was in conflict. Some of them, Al-Kindi did, I think, the best synthesis. Maybe Ibn Sina and Farabi went too far. Ibn Rushd tried to ultimately bring it to a more acceptable synthesis. Imam Ghazali was more conservative. But this engagement with Greek philosophy was the secret of early Islam, was one of the secrets of early Islam. Greek philosophy and Christian philosophy and Jewish sources. Because you have the Quran, you have hadiths, which give you a lot of wisdom, but it's not going to tell you everything. And it's not the intention to give you everything. The Quran is about guiding you about your religion, about your faith, but how the world works, is there gravity or other natural sources? So sciences, philosophy, ethical philosophy. Muslims were open to learning these things. What happened in the modern era is that, first of all, scholars like Ibn Sina, even Ibn Rushd, at some point in our history, in the closing period, they were pushed aside. They were condemned as infidels, kuffar, or heretics or suspicious. Philosophy was given a bad name. So Muslims just started rereading our own tradition. We read Imam Ghazali. That's great. Let's read Imam Ghazali. But Imam Ghazali himself read Aristotle. I mean, are you reading today's Aristotles? Aristotle is old-fashioned now, but are you reading modern philosophy and political science and everything? So the idea that we should only study Islamic sources, but nothing else, and it's a kind of religious nationalism. Like we just want to repeat our old religious books. We just want to read them. We don't want to hear from the kuffar, the infidels, and so on and so on. Whereas I think the Quran itself and the prophetic example itself shows that there is wisdom outside of Islam as well. So there can be political systems that are just, very fair, but not Islamic. How do we know this? Well, Prophet Muhammad, when Muslims were persecuted in Mecca, he said to Muslims, go and migrate to where? Ethiopia. And there was a Christian king there. He said he's a just king, and he was a just king, and he welcomed the Muslims there. So it was not an Islamic state. It was a Christian state, but it was a fair place. It was a just political order, and the Muslims found refuge there. So today, therefore, you can have political ideas. You can learn. Democracy can be a good thing. It can be developed by a non-Muslim named somebody. Liberalism can be a good idea developed by John Locke. I mean, I'm glad Dr. Abdullah mentioned John Locke. I think he's one of the interesting figures we should know. He's the father of liberalism and religious freedom, as he's honored in the West. One thing about John Locke, by the way, is that he was skeptical of Trinity, so he was a Unitarian Christian. I mean, he had Unitarian leanings. Also, his argument for religious freedom looked like the Ottoman Empire, so he was blamed to be a secret Muslim in England. So like crypto-Muslim. And so he had that kind of accusation. People blame John Locke. Just like some people today blame us to be crypto, Jews or Christians because we're defending religious freedom. Because at John Locke's time, the Ottoman Empire had more freedom, and he had positive references to the Ottoman Empire. Basically, we should understand that we are Muslims and our religious tradition is powerful, but God gave humanity not just revelation, and without revelation, human minds are just not nothing. Human minds also can develop ethical philosophy, good political systems, good ideas, and we should be open our minds, and we should one leg should be on Islam, but the other leg should be around learning from the humanity, the whole accomplishments of humanity. And that was the secret of our Islamic age, and closing that, and we still, all the rigid people that Dr. Abdalla calls the Salafis, they will refuse to. Do you read them in any book by John Locke or I don't know, Karl Popper? I mean, no, they will never. They will just read hadith and classical sheikh, ulama, shuyukh, and so on and so forth, which narrows the wisdom that we have as Muslims. Does this answer the question? I don't know, Farshid.
Okay, well, I hope that answered question for Sultan Zuli, because we're moving fast. So many questions for today's. And
okay,
now of Tresnanda, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Akyol, for your comprehensive explanation on religious freedom. My question actually goes both for Mr. Akyol and Bapak Ulil Albab. I've been seeing two different approaches in Islam or even in the Muslim world in general, or even particularly my friends. I had an argument with my friend about whether we should be studying Islam in, let me quote unquote, secular or non-religious way, or even we even had an argument about whether we should be studying tafsir at all. She's a bit rigid on Islamic law and studying Islam because she has a fear of being wrong, or she thinks by studying risky topics such as Mr. Akyol and many other scholars have studied for years, it would be as committing a sin. Is there any sort of ways or even a reason why people nowadays have such a great fear of committing sin by studying Islam in such ways? Yeah, that is my question.
So thank you so much. So is the question that she fears that when she studies Islam a bit critically, she will be slipping into sin or disbelief and God will punish her? Okay.
Yeah, that is correct.
Well, that is because, unfortunately, we have in our tradition teachings saying that, there's one path of Islam and those who fall from it will go to hell and burn in forever. And so salvation is defined very narrowly. It actually comes from a hadith, a doubtful hadith, I should say, which says, my ummah will be divided into 73 sects, 72 of them will go to hell and only one will be saved. And of course, who is that one saved one? Every madhab says it's us. Of course, we are the saved ones, and all others are. Whereas when you read the Quran promises salvation not to only all Muslims, but also for Jews and Christians and the Sabiun and the Sabians, and that were like a monotheistic community at the time. The Quran says whoever believes in God and has good deeds, God will reward them in the afterlife. So while the Quranic salvation is incredibly wide, our tradition narrowed it to just this right group, and the others are like going to astray. This is because of thought policing. Now, also what we need is to know that God is merciful, and God will not do something that is unconscientious to us, right? God will not punish an innocent child for, just because he wants to punish. Like if a Muslim genuinely and honestly tries to find the truth and moves from this interpretation of Islam to that interpretation, or even doubts, if that comes out of a sincere, honest effort, what kind of a God will look at that and will punish her or him for hellfire? Like, because God gave us reason. Reason is God-given. It's not that revelation is only God-given. God gave us our reason to think and to judge and to ask questions. So when we using this, why would we be guilty in the sight of God? I think that's how we should think. And we should look into the broad mercy that we find there in the Quran. Unfortunately, God's mercy have been sometimes replaced by God's wrath to every sin and every deviation. And I think that is because mainly people wanted to use religion to control society and to control and say that this is the right sect. And if you leave this, you will go to heaven. You will go to hell. That element of fear, using that element of fear. But I think that's not the right call. And I think we should bring the idea that honest Muslims with the God-given conscience should be able to speak and discuss issues about Islam, doubt issues about Islam. And one thing, maybe some person will fall in doubt and lose the faith, and maybe 5 years later will mature and come back to the faith. I mean, everybody has a conscience and a path of life, and we should respect that. And as good Muslims, we should try to inform people, but not use these kind of threats to say you're damned because you're asking questions.
All right, that's an interesting insights from Mr. Akyol. But what about from Gus Ulil?
Okay, so I have an impression from Mas Nawaf's question that a critical studies and critical approach to Islam and religion in general is something that is rare. I mean, few people do it, and this is wrong. If you look at Indonesian case, it is very interesting that a critical approach and critical study of Islamic sources is now being done by many Muslim scholars. A massive movement, not massive in the sense of, you know, unanimous opinion on something, but a massive movement to study Islam critically has happened for many years. And I can give you an example. For example, one of the important decision, or let's say fatwa, the religious, you know, opinion that has been issued by the largest Muslim organization in Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama, happened in the year 2019. That was a very important year in my mind. So in the year of 2019, there was a fatwa issued by Nahdlatul Ulama in its national session in West Java, saying that Muslims should stop labeling Christian and others as kafir. So don't use the term kafir anymore to address Christian, Hindus, Catholic, and others. And I think this is a very important, you know, move. I can say this is not as, you know, as on the same level as Vatican II in the Catholic, you know, history. But I think this is a very important, you know, decision and fatwa by the largest Muslim organization. So, and of course, this fatwa is not something that any Muslim or all Muslim can agree with. Some Muslims are not happy with this fatwa and say that Nahdlatul Ulama committed, in your language, a sin. Because the terminology kafir is there in the Quran. Why should we drop it? And this is, for me, is so a critical study and critical approach to Islamic sources is something that happened in many Islamic countries. In January this year, there was a controversy in Kuwait concerning a celebrity who lived Islam. His name is Ahmad Al-Mu'min, I guess, yeah. So this is a celebrity in Kuwait. He left Islam, he quit Islam, he abandoned Islam and then converted to Christianity. And it created a debate in Middle East because he tweeted about his leaving Islam. So there was a debate about whether a murtad, an apostate, should be, you know, punished by death, as Brother Akyol discussed in his book. Yeah. And you know what? The Shaykh al-Azhar, Dr. Ali Juma, and you know, Al-Azhar is like a Vatican version of the Sunni world. Yeah. So Shaykh al-Azhar, Dr. Ali Juma, said that in his fatwa that there is no death punishment for the apostate. This is Al-Azhar. This is not Mustafa Akyol. This is Ali Jum'ah. It's a heavyweight fatwa, I guess. It's not a lightweight. It's serious. So Al-Azhar issued, not Al-Azhar, but not Al-Azhar as an institution, but Ali Jum'ah as a scholar, as an ulama. So Dr. Ali Jum'ah produced a fatwa that no death punishment for the murtad, for the apostate. And I think this opinion, challenging the traditional view about apostate being punished by death, is quite common today. I mean, it's not a rarity to see scholars or ulama saying that death punishment is not relevant anymore for the apostasy. I mean, this fatwa has been issued or produced by many scholars. I think Dr. Sheikh Abdullah Bayya, one of the most important ulama today, Abdullah bin Bayya, the icon of Islamic moderation today, Abdullah bin Bayya, Dr. Ali Jum'ah, Dr. Ali At-Tayyib from Al-Azhar as well, and also many other scholars. And I guess in Indonesia itself, if you look at Indonesia, it is a very interesting case. Yeah. I don't see any ulama in Indonesia still holding to this traditional view that apostasy should be punished by death. Malaysia is different. Mr. Akyol, it's different. Malaysia has, there was a controversy in Malaysia about the use of Allah as terminology. So there was a decision by JAKIM. JAKIM is like a religious Ministry of Religious Affairs, or a council of ulama in Malaysia. So JAKIM produced a fatwa that only Muslim can use Allah. For me, this is ridiculous. I mean, how could you say that? I mean, if you study and you read, pre-Islamic sources, I mean, Allah is even in the Quran itself. Quran make a reference to the kafir, to the Quraysh, the Arab, the non-Muslim in time of the Prophet. They use Allah as a terminology. So why should we, say that Allah is for Muslim only? So this is, I mean, but okay. I mean, the problem of apostasy is relatively solved today because many serious ulama and scholars had issued a lot of fatwa, abandoning the traditional view of death punishment for the apostasy. And I think this is a progress, a progress toward more rational Islamic, interpretation. And I'm happy for that. This is, let's say, this is a Vatican II in Muslim version. We stop labeling non-Muslim as kafir, and we stop holding to the traditional view of the ulama that say that the murtad should be punished by death. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Gus Ulil. I'm sorry now if you have any response, you can write it in the chat section because we move fast to Jafar Ramadan. If you have a question, you may open your mic.
Assalamualaikum. Merhaba, Mr. Akyol. My name is. I'm a student in Turkey. This is my last year.
Okay,
it's been an honor to speak with you here. I only have one question. I'm glad you bring up the Islamic intellectual tradition in Turkey through ilahiyat, which is formal educations. What I want to ask is, outside of the formal educations, not just top down, but also bottom up in the grassroots level, because the city I'm currently studying in Mersin, let's say there is only 2 prominent Islamic organizations like Tugva or AGD, which is very political. Hakan Yawul says that these types of organizations have different agendas. One of them also, he says, as vernacularization of Islam or translating modernity to Islam, which is very similar to what happens in Malaysia in Prof. Aqib Alata's thinking, the Islamization of knowledge. I think it's very similar. There is minimum, like I said, there's no middle way in the grassroots level. Let's say you represent one people, what about the rest? Because let's say in Indonesia, there is HMI, the Muslim Student Associations. There is Nahdlatul Ulama that has been reformed by our third president, Abdurrahman Wahid. And then there is the Muhammadiyah, which also adopts Islam Wasatiyah. They don't reject modernity, but at the same time trying to keep their piety, their pious level. That's my questions. Thank you in advance, Mr. Mustafa Akyol.
Thank you so much, Dafa, and beautiful name. And I'm glad you spent time in Turkey. Hope it was enjoyable. Turkey's Islamic scene is complex in many ways. The kind of scholars I mentioned are university professors in Turkey, typically. Ilahiyat these are people in Ilahiyat faculties, that is theology faculties. That was open in Turkey since the 40s. So it studies Islam not in a traditional madrasa setting, but in the modern university setting. And they are open to secular knowledge as well. And again, in Turkish Ilahiyat, there's a spectrum, but there are modernists or reformists or historicists, who kind of have been deeply inspired by Fazlur Rahman's methodology of reading the Quran and Islamic tradition in its contextuality. And I think I learned a lot from that tradition, and I keep learning. And again, there's a spectrum. The Jama'at you mentioned, the communities, they are generally more traditional. They are less interested in the academic study of religion. They're more into piety and observance, and also, creating a space for themselves in society, jobs, putting their people in government. So the Jama'ats I respect them. They are religious freedom. Let them do what they do, unless they start to begin to use state power for their own sectarian communal interests, which typically many of them do, which is a problem. But I don't see much inspiration in the Jama'ats, honestly. So there are different institutions there, though. I mean, there are people. There's like Süleymaniye Vakfı, which is a different place from the more traditional ones. I'm more interested into the reformist section because I see the need for change in our doctrine, obviously. And Dr. Abdalla mentioned, some good steps on apostasy in Egypt and elsewhere. They don't maybe fully say it should be totally free, but at least they say there should be no death penalty. Is that correct? I mean, I think Qaradawi, for example, says, or they say apostate unless he becomes an enemy of Islam, and the enemy of Islam is very hard to define. Like, what do you mean if he speaks out fully? What is their word on that?
It's a different issue, Mr. Akyol.
Sorry?
Is a bit. Qaradawi is a
bit. I know. Yeah. Qaradawi is a different level. Yeah, that's a Qatari exorcism. That's in Egypt. And I mean, I appreciate those steps. And these steps have been taken. Nahdlatul Ulama, as you mentioned, actually has taken a very big step regarding kafir. I mean, the issue of kafir, using the word kafir. And I supported that, by the way, Nahdlatul Ulama's approach, because, the Quran uses the word kafir for those people who see the truth of Islam, who are convinced by it, but reject it out of greed or just being loyal to their fathers and that sort of thing. But a lot of Christians and other people in the world, they're not convinced by Islam. They just, are living their own tradition. So they cannot be called kafir. So I agree with Nahda on that. Sorry, the question, Dafa, was, did I answer your question? Like, was it, you mentioned that you asked about the Turkish landscape. What was the other question?
I was asking about the grassroots levels of Islamic intellectual traditions in Turkey, because I don't think there are so many people that speaks in your view in the public. It's very minimal.
Turkey, there are good things about Turkey, there are bad things about Turkey. And there are a lot of politically bad things about Turkey these days. So I'm not going to get into that. But one thing in Turkey is that there are Islamic Jamaat, the communities that are generally living a very traditional view of Islam. I'm sympathetic to the line opened by Said Nursi, which was a modernist for his age, a mild modernist, in late 19th and early 20th century. And also he emphasized Iman, faith aspect of Islam compared to other aspects. And he's kind of very, therefore, defensive about belief in God. And he's not into Sharia and jurisprudence that much. He's more into kind of a defense apologist. And his writings influenced the Nur movement in Turkey, which, as long as it's sort of away from state power, I think supported democracy. And so I see some wisdom there in that sense. But to me, there's one problem in Turkey is that Turkey's secular class, which also know the Western tradition more, they showed no interest in religion per se. So whereas I see in some Muslim majority countries that there's a more westernized class, but still interested in religion. But Turkey's, because of Kemalist heritage, there's a totally irrelevant group who has no idea about, basic Islamic concepts better, except a few cultural things like the bayrams and visits. So, but I do think still Turkey's Islamic heritage, they're good scholars. And in Turkey, the good thing is you don't get a death fatwa sort of response. I mean, you'll be condemned, but you'll get some heated reactions on Twitter, but still there is some room to discuss these issues in Islam. You don't have that in everywhere, obviously, in every society. You don't have that in Saudi Arabia or even in Egypt, like Nasr Abu Zaid was declared a murtad and he had to leave Egypt for fearing his security in the 2010s. People like Nasr Abu Zaid who emphasize reading the Quran in context, they are there in Turkey. Some people don't like them, but they can still write or teach. So that is the good thing. But I do value Indonesia's growing presence in the world of Islam with Nahdlatul Ulama, with its political experience. And I think in the Middle East, there are also so many political interests and agendas at play. You can appreciate something Al-Azhar said, but what about the political realities of Egypt? Incredibly brutal, ugly, and authoritarian. Indonesia comes, I think, with less baggage to the Muslim world. And I think I value, that's why the tradition I see in Indonesia. And I know it is more open than Malaysia, which is something great. And please keep it that way.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answered question for Dafa. And we have question from chat section, actually, from Darius Meraj. He asked, what is the function of the Holy Book in the life of a believer? Do you think religion can teach us about science, sociology, politics, etc.? Christians are having the same approach as Mr. Akyol, and they may win intellectually, but lose the people to the fundamentalists. That's his question.
So is it like, can the Holy Book, that as the Quran, can teach us about science and politics? Was that a part of the question? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, it is part of the question.
My answer would be, thank you so much for the question. My answer would be, no, the Quran will not teach us much about politics and science, but the Quran can inspire us and guide us towards these disciplines with certain values. One thing, I mean, the Quran repeatedly tells the believers to examine the created universe, right? Look into the heavens and how God created, how God created animals and the plants and the stars. And now this is not biology definition. It's not, but you're not going to see how the world works in the Quran, but the Quran tells you to look to the world. So the Quran gives you an inspiration, and it's not an accident that I mean, Ibn Rushd mentions those verses when he says we need philosophy, because philosophy includes the study of nature. So the Quran will inspire a believer to look into biology. It's not that he will find everything he needs about science in the Quran. I mean, some people think that there are all these secrets in the Quran, you have to decipher those. I don't agree with that. Regarding politics, the Quran will not teach you much about politics. I mean, the Quran doesn't tell you that whether a country should be a monarchy or a republic, or a federation or a unitary state where there should be elections. The Quran doesn't tell you anything about these things because the Quran is focused on teaching monotheism to its environment and also guiding Prophet Muhammad in his political mission. The Prophet Muhammad's political mission is a mission that cannot be repeated. There is no prophet with us anymore. So there is nobody that we can obey as the head of the Muslim community. So the Quran, though, emphasizes justice very much. So with an inspiration for the Quran, we can say we need political theories that uphold justice. And that is one reason I believe in liberty, because I think liberty is a key component of justice. And when you don't have liberty in a society, there will be oppression, and that is injustice. So the Quran can give us values as it does, as the Bible gives to Christians, but it doesn't give us blueprints, systems, ideologies that we have to strictly obey. With the inspiration of the Quran, we should look into the social and natural sciences that humanity has developed over centuries.
All right, thank you. Now we move fast to Safran Bilahi, if you have a question.
Thank you. Yunler Hujam, Mr.
Yunler.
I'm Safran. I'm living also in Ankara in Turkey. First, congratulations on your new book, Why as Muslim I Defend Liberty. Your governing Muslim minds. Yes. In your article and comments, you provide some provocative argument and question. Is it true that freedom is Western value? You explain that freedom was adopted by Muslims before the Western faced the Renaissance. The question, historically, in some Muslim countries, Muslim thinkers, Muslim activists are trying to fight for reformation of Muslim world. But maybe my question is intersected like Gus Ulil, why the reformists, they fail to reform the Muslim world. We know Toha Hussein in Egypt or Hassan Hanafi Occidentalism. That's the question, Hujam. Thank you.
Thank you. Is freedom a Western value? That was the first question. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'm glad you're enjoying Turkey, and teşekkürler and for your kind words as well. Happy to hear that. Is justice a Western value? It's a universal human value. And we believe in justice. Christians believe in justice. Atheist people believe in justice. You know, most, I mean, some don't obviously, but some do. And if you look into, if you make a justice index of the world, today the most just countries in the world, where you have no corruption in the judicial system and people are fair and there is little bribery and that kind of stuff. I mean, the countries that will come as number one are probably, and there are indexes such as those, will be countries like New Zealand or Finland or Norway, possibly, which means justice is a universal value. And for some reason, some of the Western countries these days, in the past few, let's say, centuries, have done better in justice. Whereas we were doing much better in justice 1,000 years ago. I mean, we have records in the Ottoman Empire of Christian women coming to Ottoman Sharia courts to get a divorce because it was not possible, you know, in their own religious tradition. We have examples of Sharia looking more fair and just to non-Muslims in terms of religious freedom until a few centuries ago. But in the past few centuries, because of modernity, development, liberal democracies, rise of human rights, certain standards became better in other parts of the world. And it's not just about the West. I think Japan is pretty good too. I mean, or some of the non-Muslim societies, non-Western societies and non-Muslim ones that are, that have decent political systems. Whereas when you look at justice in some Muslim majority societies today with oppressive governments, you won't find that justice. The same thing is true for liberty. Liberty is a universal human value. And if we did not abrogate a part of the Quran, and if we kept renewing our understanding of religion, we would be the champions of liberty. Now, other people might have developed liberty. It's fine. We should not think that it is their value. And I think one thing that complicates the picture here is in the past 2 centuries, Muslims heard liberty, freedom, human rights from generally Western countries. And at the same time, those Western countries were the ones that colonized the Muslim land, plundered our countries, occupied Muslim nations. From Algeria to Indonesia, Muslim world was colonized. And we had to sometimes fight against these occupiers, especially in Algeria and elsewhere. And the West is also getting a lot of reaction for its colonial history or its support for Israel, especially the United States in the Middle East. But we should be able to make a distinction between being angry at the foreign policy or of a power and then looking into how systems work there. And I think that's why in the 19th century, we have Islamic liberals like Namık Kemal in the Ottoman Empire, Hayrettin el-Tunusi from Tunisia, Hayrettin Pasha. They looked into West and they admired many things. Although they were critical, they were cautious about Western colonialism. They admired the fact that people can speak the government in London and not get into jail for that. And they said that's a good value. And they looked into the sources of that value in our Islam. Why these reforms have not been as successful as we want them to be? Well, to some extent, there has been successes. I mean, why we don't have any slavery anymore? Right? These things change. Why we have, some republics, I mean, a lot of things change. I mean, at least there are laws which say you are equal under the law with Christians and Jews. I mean, a lot of modernization, political modernization have taken place. In Pakistan, there are elections. I mean, Indonesia is a democracy, right? So we have made some progress. This progress would be unthinkable 2 centuries ago. When Muslims saw today, they would be surprised. I mean, a lot has been changed. But there is also resistance. There is also reaction to this progress. And that is putting us into a very difficult situation right now. And I believe we are in the worst era of the Ummah. I mean, there has been 14 centuries of history of the Islamic civilization. We might be in the most difficult era, in the sense that for 1,000 years, we could tell the world, why can't you be as free and just as we are, right? We were better. But that's not obviously the case. Everybody sees that right now, unless we are too defensive about it. And also about 4 centuries ago, we could say, look at these Christians, they cannot get along with each other. I mean, they are killing each other for sake. Look at us, we are much more tolerant. We could say that. But today, can we say this? Christians don't bomb each other's churches anymore, but you have people bombing the mosque of another Muslim saying Allahu Akbar. I mean, these are extremists. But in Malaysia, try being a Shia, and you will have Jakib that is coming and monitoring you and stopping some of your practices. So we are in a difficult situation. Why it didn't work? Societies don't change unless they see the consequences of bad ideas. Christianity changed because they saw the consequences of the ideas of killing heretics and apostates and punishing, and they moved on to accepting neutral governments that protects everybody's rights. That's our future. We should establish governments whose only job is to protect the rights of citizens, and it is the citizens' right to be good Muslims, Sunni, Shia, Ahmadi, whatever they believe in, or Christian or atheist or whatever they believe in. So protecting the rights of human beings is the job of governments. It's their duty, and it's not their job to tell us what to believe. So that is a transition we made to some extent. I mean, Indonesia is a secular democracy by most definitions. And also one more thing is that our secularism also has been very bad. Like Turkey got secularism, something called laiklik, from France, among all places, for I don't know why. But I mean, it's a secularism that bans the hijab in campus. I mean, I fought against that. I mean, argued against that for years in Turkey. Like, we also got some bad ideas from the West, such as a secularism that doesn't really allow full religious practice. So that also created a lot of reaction, of course, to modernity. But still, I mean, liberalism is mainly classical liberalism, the idea that governments are limited and protecting rights and religious freedom. That is still the big untested story in our world. But I think we are heading towards that, but all making all the wrong choices and suffering from those.
Thank you, Mr. Akyol. I have that answer question for Safran. And I'm sorry for everyone because our time is almost up. And I'm sorry, I cannot read everyone's question. We actually still have a question from Sulkan and Muhammad Hasif Aska. And the latest one was from Mr. Bambang. But if you want to ask or discuss more, Mr. Akyol and Gus Ulil can be reached through Twitter or email, I believe. And before I close tonight's discussion, I'd like to mention for those who haven't known that here is the book of Mr. Mustafa Akyol, Reopening Muslim Minds. Untuk teman-teman yang di Indonesia, saya tadi cek bisa dapat buku ini di Periplus ya, tapi harganya agak lebih naik daripada yang di Amazon. Kalau di Amazon juga masuk kena biaya kirim. Dan juga bisa baca versi e-booknya aja. Kalau misalkan susah untuk dapat hard copy, di Google Play, Apple Books, juga di Amazon Kindle, atau beli hard copy-nya di Better World Books dan Book Depository. Mungkin agak lama pengiriman karena pandemi. Dan buku-buku lain dari Pak Mustafa Akyol ini adalah Islam Tanpa Ekstremisme yang tadi disebutkan sudah diterjemahkan oleh penerbit Quanta, The Islamic Jesus, mungkin judulnya yang agak apa ini Islamic Jesus ya. Dan yang terbaru saya salah menyebutkan tadi, terbitan April 2021, jadi tahun ini sangat baru, Reopening Muslim Minds Mustafa Akyol, dan ini halaman di Amazon-nya. Bisa dilihat kalau harganya segitu, kira-kira teman-teman masih bisa beli mungkin ya kalau untuk buku dari bahasa Inggris, kira-kira rata-rata harganya segitu. Dan thank you for Mr. Mustafa Akyol and Gus Ulil, terima kasih. Mohon maaf
terima kasih ya.
Apabila ada kekurangan. Thank you. That concludes our discussion tonight. And I hope everyone got their answer. And you can conclude yourself. It's not my place to conclude. It's such a lively and wonderful discussion. And I hope to get to meet you again, Mr. Akyol and Gus Ulil, in another occasion. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Faicha. Thank you, Dr. Abdalla. And
see you later.
See you later, inshallah.